Okay, Parshas Toledot. Very interesting parsha. I think if we remember this parsha from grade school, there's a lot of good stories in here. Takes us back. Learned it when we were young. But I think if we approach it maybe with a fresh look now, there's some very interesting things to take away from what the parsha has to say. We'll try and break them down into maybe three key topics. So the parsha starts off with the story of Yitzchak and Rivka are going off in their to go build a family, which is what Avram blessed them to do. But it starts off with a very interesting phrasing. It says that Yitzchak was the son of Abraham, and Abraham begot Yitzchak. So this is the double lashon to describe how Yitzchak was born. And it brings down that there was a question. The Mefarshim say that at the time, people thought, because Abraham and Sarah had been married for so long, that Yitzchak potentially was not his kid. So Dafka that brings down this double lashon to explain that Yitzchak was his kid. But if we think about this one step further than just the explanation, okay, fine, he made him look, we heard this double lashon, they say he looked exactly like him, his countenance was exactly like his father. But to think also about what it means to have doubt that people were talking about him behind his back. He's not actually his kid. So Rabbi Sachs brings down a very interesting explanation about the fact that this was one of the formative parts of who Yitzchak was, and it influenced him throughout much of his life. Right after this, we hear the story of Rivka. She has a fighting in her womb. There's two nations are going to be born. She goes and she gets a prophecy. Everything about this is a demonstration of her going off on her own. She didn't have this 100% connection with Yitzchak. And part of this is, in a way, it's because he started off his life with cynical criticism. The world looked at him and said, we're not so sure about this. If you look at the world, for us to start off with doubt, this can undermine so many things. Somebody gives a speech, you find one hole in it, the whole thing falls apart. I'm sure that comes most of the time when I talk, but sometimes there's some good things you can take away from it. So hopefully we won't discount the whole thing. There'll be some things to glean. So this influences Yitzchak and Rivka, their whole relationship for the rest of their lives. And I think that this actually also becomes sort of the ground for the next setting of the stage of the infighting between Yaakov and Esav and the way that next narrative of the blessings plays out. So we have the story, it continues, the kids grow up, Esav sells his birthright for a bowl of red stuff. Real cheap deal. And then we have this interesting aside. So there's a famine. Yitzchak never leaves Eretz Yisrael. So he has to go to Avimelech. And there's this interesting little narrative that happens here about the wells. There's a story about these wells that Yitzchak digs. As the famine is going on. And I think there's some interesting things that we can learn about the actual choice of these words. This is maybe an example of the original 12 steps. Before there were 12, there were 4. Yitzchak goes through the struggle. So we know that Yitzchak is influenced from his childhood. He has this doubt, cynicism that we talked about. So what does he go through? He goes through the undoing, the redigging of the wells that his father dug. They were stuffed up by Avimelech, and there's supposed to be this treaty with Avimelech, but he ends up not actually following the treaty as he should. And Yitzchak, I think there's a hidden story here about the steps that he navigates to kind of come out of this challenge. So the first well that he digs is one called Asek, which is about this internal conflict that we face. The next one is about one that is called Sitna, which ends up being a sort of a definition of hatred or blame. He's giving sinna to somebody. Your fault. He's externalizing this challenge. Then the next one that he redigs is one called Rechovot, which is a way of expanding, sort of he integrates these challenges that he has and takes them on as something that can be part of him, and he can allow himself to move forward. And then we have a fourth well which he digs, which is not a re-digging of a well, but it's actually Yitzchak's own well, and that is Sheva. And this is later, because it says it becomes Be'er Sheva. This is the place that we know of as today. And that's the sort of, he makes a covenant with himself that he can move forward in his own way. There's now a new version of Yitzchak that can continue. So there's this little aside that maybe we can learn some of our OG 12 steps, the 4 steps from back in the day. The Parsha continues, and there's an interesting narrative. The Parsha started off that Yitzchak got married when he was 40, and now after this little story, it says that Esav got married when he was 40. We have this little echo of time. So there's a definite story here about how people are kind of trying to emulate or follow in the footsteps or face the challenges of the previous generation, the generation that came before them. So what happens now? We have this amazing story of the blessings. Yitzchak sends out Esav to go and go give me some gain, come back, I'll do some blessings for you, don't worry about it. Rivka swoops in. She says, I heard this prophecy back in the day, we heard at the beginning of the Parsha, that this one is not supposed to receive the blessings. This one is not going to inherit the way that you would think he should. He's not supposed to be the firstborn. He sold it, all these things that come up. But we have a question here, because really, you think Yitzchak was one of the most discerning people in the world, connected to God on such a level. He couldn't tell that Esav was not going to. So there's midrashim brought down about, he had a spiritual blindness. The spiritual blindness was brought down from the Akedah. Maybe he had more of a physical blindness that, in his aging. So there's different descriptions of how exactly that went. But I think that even in the description of the blessings themselves, you can see that Yitzchak really had a plan to give 2 different blessings to 2 different kids. He was going to give a blessing for the Yerusha of continuing the generations and inheriting the land to Yaakov, and he was going to give a blessing of wealth to prosperity to Esav. And it was sort of in his mind, he was hoping that there could be kind of a bridge between the 2 sons. One would support the other, and so on and so forth. But what we see actually is that it didn't go down that way, and Rivka's prophecy that she got from Shem Ve'aver ends up being that the blessing for wealth and prosperity goes also to Yaakov. So Yaakov gets 2. And I think it's also telling, because Esav eventually comes back and he says, hey, what happened? Yitzchak says, what do you mean? I just gave you the blessing. So then he gives him, if you read the words, he gives him a very similar blessing. You should be, prosperous, and you'll get from the dew of the land and all those kinds of things. But he does it in a way where he describes the way that the 2 nations will be in relation to the world. So he says, with Yaakov, he describes it that Yaakov will be a leader of the nations will serve him, and he'll be prosperous with that. And with Esav, he says he's going to be prosperous through his sword, and he's going to serve his brother. But there's this interesting balance that we have between the way that the two brothers are going to. He'll be able to throw off this yoke when it comes time when the other brother doesn't behave as well. So I think it's interesting if you think about the last 2 these 2 brothers. Who are they? The way that they're described in the Parsha is Yaakov is Kol, and Yadayim is Esav, and this is almost like the way that we describe these two children here. And what you see is actually at the moment of these blessings, they do a little yin-yang kind of a thing. They're mostly one color, but they adopt a little of the other one. So what does Yaakov do when he goes to get the blessings? He covers himself. He becomes Yadayim Esav, a shtickle. He hides in that kind of a way. And what happens afterwards when Esav finds out that he missed the blessings? He lets out a tza'aka. He becomes Kol in a way. So you see that there's sort of the melding of the 2 sides of the different brothers, and they that's how they come together. There's something else interesting about this, that when you think about Yadayim, the Rav Nachman brings down that Yadayim are actually in reference, the right hand is in reference to Chesed, and the left hand is in reference to Gevura. If you remember from last week, we talked about Gevura and Chesed are in relation to Yitzchak and Avraham. So these are the ways that those sort of the previous generation gets adopted in this generation, right? So what was the way of Esav? He was in his extremes. He kind of lived at the periphery of both sides of things. Yaakov, on the other hand, we'll get to this maybe more in next week, but Yaakov is known as Tiferet. And if you look at the Sfirot, Tiferet is the bridge between Chesed and Gevura. It's the one that brings those two things together. It's also, from the way that we describe it, Tiferet is a way of speech, right? Praise and call and stuff like that. It's how he brings these two things together. So in a way, Yaakov ends up being the harmony of the two fathers that came before him. He brings together the bookends of their ways of life in an interesting way. And I think if you think about this, so Rav Nachman brings down that Keter is the ultimate place that we're trying to reach. That's where Hashem is. That's where the godless is. And when you behave well and you're not just focused on a material life like Esav was, then you can chase Keter. You can chase that. But when you are just focused on a material life, like we say that Esav was, then you end up switching around some of the letters and you end up in Kares. You end up spiritually disconnected from the world around you. And really the way that he says you bring that down, and this is an interesting thing, how did Yaakov actually go do these things? We think about Yaakov, he's really is an overthinker almost. He's like a quiet, intellectual person. The actions that he takes are somewhat irrational. He goes in there, he's wearing a sheep's skin. All of a sudden, I'm going to trick my dad. The fact that he has trust in these kinds of things is an inspiration. That's what allows us to get to Keter, that kind of internal faith. Esav, on the other hand, every step of the way, we say that he was kind of placating what his father wanted. My father got married at 40. I'll get married at 40. Later on, they send Yaakov to go marry a non-Isha Cananis. Okay, fine. I'll also take a non-Isha Cananis. Everything that he did was over-rationalized. He didn't have the faith. So he followed in his father's footsteps in a way, but he did it without the integration of that extra piece of faith that he needed. So a little bit on the Parsha, something to take away, I guess. Azoi, good job.
Good news.